Every love story begins with hope. Two people drawn together by affection, by trust, by the dreams of a shared tomorrow. Marie Kendale Kimani and Jonathan Kimani Tumbo once had that dream. To friends, they looked like any other couple. Laughter, whispers, the private world only lovers understand. But behind closed doors, something darker was taking shape. Love soared into resentment, arguments became more frequent, and silence turned into distance. And then the unthinkable. The woman who once said, "I love you," would be accused of ending Jonathan's love. How does love turn into hate? How does a partner become a killer? Tonight, we follow the chilling path of Marie Kendale Kimani and the tragic fate of Jonathan Tumbo. Marie Kendale Kimani and Jonathan Tumbo's story begin like so many youthful romance. In high school back in Kenya, they dated, drifted apart, and built lives an ocean apart. Kimani moved to the United States and eventually became a citizen. Tumbo settled in Dubai, where work and opportunity pulled him forward. Years later, fate brought them together. Their love rekindled across distance, and before long, the two married in Dubai. But even as they said their vows, secrets lingered. While still abroad, Tumbo had fathered a son with another woman. He remained in contact with that child, though Kimani wouldn't discover the truth until later in their marriage. Kimani herself was already a mother. Her son, Jeremy Mushemi, had been born in Kenya and raised by relatives until the age of 10, when he finally joined his mother and stepfather in the United States. Life in the household was complicated but at first stable. Mushemi recalled that his mother and stepfather had a strong relationship, though arguments sometimes rattled the walls. It was never outright violence, but shouting matches, objects thrown, and tension that rarely fully dissolved. By 2017, the cracks were impossible to ignore. The couple drifted into separate bedrooms, their connection weakened by suspicion and strain. Kimani believed Tumbo was unfaithful, not just once, but with multiple women. By June 2018, she filed for divorce. Tumbo didn't fight it. 2 months later, in August, the marriage was legally over. Tumbo moved on quickly. Around that same time, he began a relationship with a woman named Alinda Davis. In the days leading up to his death, he spent most nights at her home. Their lives intertwined fast, but the shadow of his former marriage still loomed. The afternoon before his death, Tumbo visited Davis at the bar where she worked. That's where Kimani appeared. The two women met for the first time in tense encounter. Davis offered Kimani a glass of water. Kimani, in return, insisted that she and Tumbo were still married. It was a sharp warning shot, one that left Davis and Tumbo unsettled. That night, Tumbo stayed at Davis' house. Kimani sent him a series of text messages he largely ignored. By morning, he told Davis he was heading to Kimani's house to collect some belongings and his dog. He promised he would return soon. But as the days wore on, his replies grew sporadic. Concerned, Davis texted him repeatedly. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., she called his phone. To her shock, Kimani answered. Davis would hear Tumbo's voice in the background, tense and pleading, telling her not to speak. And then the line went dead. On the evening of June 2018 at 7:15 p.m., Marie Kendale Kimani dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she confessed to the dispatcher, "We were fighting. I messed up." When police and paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, they found a horrifying scene inside Kimani's home. In a closet lay the body of Jonathan Tumbo, sprawled on his back, a pink 9mm handgun lying nearby. He had been shot once in the chest. The bullet tore through his heart and lung before exiting his back. Death was almost instant. Kimani told investigators it was all an accident. She insisted she had not meant to pull the trigger, but the evidence in that room told a different story. The bullet had driven through Tumbo's body and buried itself in the carpet padding, and even the concrete foundation beneath him proved that he was already on the ground when he was shot. Blood spatter marked the wall just 20 inches above the floor, and there were no blood on his lower body. Forensic scientists concluded Jonathan Kimani Tumbo had been lying down when the gun was fired. And the weapon itself, Kimani's own handgun, wasn't easy to fire by mistake. Experts explained that its double-action trigger required extraordinary pressure. It will take the force of 2 5-pound bags of flour just to discharge a single shot. This was not a hair-triggered accident. Soon after, a Wise County grand jury indicted Kimani for the first-degree murder. In court, prosecutors painted a chilling picture of a woman consumed by suspicion and anger. They alleged that Kimani had often threatened Tumbo when she believed he was cheating. One story claimed she once stood over him as he slept, holding a gun, and whispered, "You look so peaceful. I could just pull the trigger and end it right now." Her son Jeremy Muchemi testified that his mother sometimes made violent threats in moments of rage. Though he didn't specify then against Tumbo, the defense objected. The judge instructed the jury to disregard, but the shadow of those words lingered. Then came the most damaging evidence. Kimani's own videotaped statement to detectives that night of the shooting. Calm but conflicted, she admitted the gun had gone off, but the jurors were left to ask, could this really have just been an accident given the forensic proof? The case was no longer about the marital fight gone wrong. It was about whether Marie Kendale Kimani had deliberately ended the life of the man she once loved. But even inside the courtroom, the case was far from clean. The trial court had already ruled that parts of Kimani's police interview were inadmissible. Prosecutors had agreed to cut those pieces from the video before showing it to the jury. But when the tape played, a mistake slipped through. The jury had Kimani talk about giving up custody of her son. The video stopped abruptly. The jurors were ushered out, and the defense immediately demanded a mistrial. The judge refused, instead instructing the jury to disregard what they'd heard. It wouldn't be the last time. Later during the punishment phase, prosecutors introduced a letter found in Kimani's closet. They couldn't authenticate it, but they still pushed questions about its contents, even hinting it contained threats tied to Kimani's child. Again, the judge sustained objections and ordered the jury to ignore the suggestion. Again, the defense demanded a mistrial, and again, the court said no. The jury had already made up its mind. The evidence of Tumbo's death, the weapon, and Kimani's own words overweighed the courtroom's error. They returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. And when it came to sentencing, the decision was final: 40 years in prison plus $10,000 fine. For the state, it was justice. For the defense, it was a trial riddled with errors. And for Jonathan Tumbo, it was a life cut short, his story silenced in that closet. After her conviction, Marie Kendale Kimani wasn't ready to accept her fate. Her lawyers claimed the trial wasn't fair, that the judge had denied her a mistrial 3 times, even after the evidence they called prejudicial slipped before the jury. The first incident happened when her son Jeremy Muchemi was on the stand and prosecutors asked, "Did you ever hear your mother threaten to kill any person?" Jeremy said yes, adding it happened out of anger. The defense immediately objected, saying those words could make the jury believe Kimani had threatened to kill Jonathan Tumbo, when the truth was those comments were made years earlier and had nothing to do with him. The judge agreed the question was misleading and told the jury to disregard the testimony, but Kimani's team wasn't convinced. They said once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. The request for mistrial was denied. The second blow came when state played Kimani's police interview. The court had already ruled that parts maintaining her losing custody of her son were inadmissible. But due to an editing mistake, that section played in court. The video stopped immediately and the jury was sent out. The judge told them to disregard what they've heard. Again, Kimani's team called for a mistrial, and again it was denied. Cold quiet of the courtroom, the fate of Marie Kendale Kimani hung in balance. not for the crime itself, but for whether her conviction was fair. She had already been sentenced to 40 years in prison for killing Jonathan Kimani Tumbo, the man she once loved, but her lawyers weren't done fighting. They believed the trial had been poisoned by mistakes, moments when the jury had heard things they shouldn't have. 3 separate times, Kimani defense asked for mistrial. 3 times, the judge said no. The judge trusted the jury to follow instructions, and when the appeal reached the higher courts, that same reasoning held. The appellate judge said the jury charge, the final written instructions they received before deliberating, had made things crystal clear. They were told not to consider any statement or evidence that court had ordered them to disregard. They were also warned not to guess what answers might have been or why objections were sustained. There was no proof that jury ignored those instructions, and in the end, the evidence itself was too strong to be undone by a few stray words. Kimani had admitted to shooting Tumbo. Her defense was that it was unintentional, but the physical evidence told a different story. Tumbo had been shot through the heart at close range while lying on the ground inside their closet. Her gun, a handgun with a heavy trigger, wasn't prone to accident discharge, and according to the investigators, the shot had been fired deliberately in a way that showed control and purpose. Under Texas law, the question wasn't just did she pull the trigger, it was did she intend to kill him. And when a deadly weapon is used in a deadly manner, the law says intent to kill can almost be presumed. Then there was a motive, the emotional storm behind the acts. Kimani and Tumbo had recently divorced but were still living together. Tumbo had started dating another woman, Davis, soon after the split. Kimani was furious, still telling Davis that she and Tumbo were married. The night before his death, she answered Tumbo's phone when Davis called and refused to let her speak to him. There were testimony that Kimani believed Tumbo had cheated on her before, maybe even fathered a child with another woman. Jealousy, betrayal, heartbreak, all boiling under the surface. So when Kimani called 911 after the gun went off, she said words that still haunt the case. "We were fighting and I effed him." For the appellate courts, that was enough. They ruled that the jury's verdict that Kimani had intentionally or knowingly killed Tumbo was supported by the evidence. Even if the jury had heard things they shouldn't have, the judges believed it hadn't changed the outcome. And so, her conviction stood. The mistrial denials were upheld. The 40-year sentence remained. For the state, it was justice done. For Kimani, it was the echo of love story that entered in blood, and a life now measured in years behind bars.